Hello everyone, welcome to the week 12 lecture, part 1, where I'll be going through a full breakdown of the second assessment task and final assessment task, second and final I should say, assessment task for EMS207, which is a digital learning resource and an associated report. So this assessment task will be worth a total of 45% of your grade. It will be due on the 30th of May 2025. And will be returned to you, again another typo, can't fix that one, on the 24th of June or thereabouts. Again, it depends on whether you take the auto extension or not, but I will it is to be submitted on Brightspace, and the 7-day auto extension is in fact available for this assessment task because it is not a group assessment task. So it's your choice there. Just let us know in due course. So for this, let's just go through an overview of the task. So you will design and produce a digital learning resource, okay? So something on the computer, basically on the computer, using one of the core technologies available to you. We will be going through the different options or recommended options. You certainly can use some of the basics like PowerPoint, although we don't recommend it, to be quite honest. We'll mark anything for what it's worth when it's submitted, but it will be against the rubric, and we're guiding you towards success here. So try and communicate with us first. So your first goal will be to facilitate and the resource will be to facilitate the learning of science and technology concepts or skills in an authentic way. So it's meant to align with the teaching principles that we talked about earlier on in the semester. So it's not a replacement. It shouldn't be a series of videos. It shouldn't be a series of quizzes. It is not required that the students have to sit in front of that resource and use it passively the entire time. It can be a hub they come to, they return, they go back away from, they use it as a class, they might go out and take videos and upload things and do all sorts of stuff. So it's meant to enrich the student-centered practices that hopefully you described in the first assessment task, not replace them, okay? So it can support one of the science lessons from assessment 1, but this is not required. You can choose a different area of the science syllabus and a stage level if you prefer, but if you're comfortable, you can certainly go in and play around with the different areas of the syllabus and stage. If you're comfortable, you can stick with what you've been doing, basically. So there are different digital platforms here. You can use an IWB, although we've been shifting away from this because it's not as easy to work with. You can create a learning management system or use a web-based digital learning resource. That is our recommendation historically. You can use things like Google Classrooms, websites, QR codes, and those sorts of things. So the advice is to create like a hub resource. Google Sites, I think, has become the most popular, and I think that's for a pretty good reason, to be quite honest. But talk to us first, basically, to make sure that the technology you've picked is suitable as the main hub, because some technologies are better as supporting elements. Like videos, for example, are better as supporting elements rather than the central resource in and of itself. You can select a different form, but confer with your coordinator prior to proceeding is the recommendation. The digital learning resource, so the main hub resource, the hub tool, whether it be a website or what have you, should then be supported with additional digital media elements such as photographs, drawn images, audio, animation, websites, videos, apps, whatever you like. Don't need all of it, but it needs to support good quality science learning. Alongside the resource, you will need to provide a 2-page report. And this 2-page report and the references are not part of this, to be quite honest. The references are not part of this. So you get 2 pages without references. In the report, you need to explain how and why the digital learning resource is used in a lesson. So we need to see the pedagogies that it supports and the academic evidence supporting that decision. So this is where you can use those scholarly citations that have been sprinkled throughout the subject and find some of your own through Google Scholar and the journal databases. The justification should demonstrate an understanding of relevant theories of learning and teaching approaches. So the 5 E's, constructivism, project problem-based learning, those concepts that we've been talking about. Don't need to do all of them, but if it's in that sort of student-centered area, and that doesn't mean it has no teacher-centered stuff, it's student-centered area, you will probably be on the right track. You will need to identify the intended outcomes and content from the K-6 syllabus. So you can mostly list that in the report. you can explain it if you wish, but we'll make judgment calls as to how well those are developed within the lesson and on the basis of your description in the 2-page report. You need to identify and discuss common student alternative conceptions which are relevant to the design of the resource. To avoid people being penalised for taking different phases. For example, if you're doing an explain phase, diagnostic assessment's not going to fit. These can just be relevant to the main content area or the science in general. That's the backup plan here. So this can be hypothetical. It can be embedded in your resource if it makes sense. If not, it can just be this information can be presented in the report. Basically, if we can find what we need across the resource and the report, we'll award you marks for it. Fair enough? You need to address major elements of science and technology pedagogy relevant to the design and implementation of your resource. Now, we've left this intentionally broad because there are so many ways to approach this. You might have students' alternative conceptions as a main focus of your resource. It might be in there as a form of assessment, there might be a conceptual change element, or there may not. Scientific inquiry, working scientifically, higher order thinking, social constructivism, authentic tasks, student-centered learning, etc., etc., etc. There are so many elements to this. You might be a real assessment person. You might have a community project. We don't want to hem you in or put you in a box here. But if you think about the two minimum ones, the minimum would be the syllabus and the 5 E's. If you can do those well, then we can probably move you along and give you that, pass you in the subject. You also need to describe how your digital learning resource fits within an appropriate model. In this case, it will be the 5 E's. Our recommendation is go 1 to 2 E's maximum. Engage, explore, explain, elaborate. Probably keep them in sequence or it will become extremely confusing. Don't skip, reorder or merge. And look, at max, go a 3rd E if you're really red hot keen. If you go over and just generate more stuff, it'll just stop adding to your mark and we reserve the right to stop reviewing it. But we won't penalise you. Okay, you'll just be wasting your time. Well, maybe you really like doing it. So we're not going to penalise people for doing lots of good work. It just means it won't help you at a certain point. So there's a brief outline of how to approach the task here. So the first thing you want to do is select a concept or skill you wish to focus on. So a knowledge and understanding outcome should of course be the focus, similar to the first assessment task. And working scientifically in design and production outcomes should inform the design. So again, you want the knowledge and understanding being the content, and working scientifically and or design and production being driving the actions and the skills and the products being created through that learning resource. So remember, the resource is a hub. It's not the end point. They can be going and designing things themselves. It can be showing examples, okay? They can still do physical hands-on things, come back to the resource. It's to facilitate and support, not replace, if we think of it that way. We want to conduct some background, so you want to conduct some background research on the topic, internet, library resources, the subject materials, etc. There's so much of it. Finding some scholarly articles on pupils' ideas and alternative conceptions is advised because it is required in the report. Background information and readings to support your knowledge and understanding of the content are also recommended, and you've probably already done some of that work if you scored a high mark and paid attention to this equivalent lecture in the for the first assessment, the week 8 part 2 lecture. So this should also include applications of the content to the world and the lives of students or to global and local issues. So if you can, having a projection out into the community and having authentic grounding is desirable here. But again, you don't want to make it work based on your topic. Don't force everything in here. You should also look at teachers' resources, curriculum documents, and other resources and online materials can be really helpful in this space. You then want to design an interactive digital learning resource for student-centered learning appropriate for what the stage level and concept and or skills. I've left that open-ended too to see how you interpret the syllabus. Hopefully by this point you're pretty confident in this. If you're basing off your first assessment, you're probably already pretty well versed in that as well, but you can change. As we've said, discuss it in tutorials if you can. The digital resource must include and or support interactive learning activities that engage students in higher order thinking. So you can have questions and answers here. You can have them go away and collect data. They're not sitting there and watching the resource the whole time. So it can be similar to Bloom's taxonomy or the silo taxonomy that we've talked about as well. It is what students are doing at that point, what is being facilitated, not whether they're standing in front of the resource or not. In designing the resource, the needs of the students and teachers consider the needs of students and teachers as both will be users of the resource. So you want clear communication for students. We often see people create like teacher background pages or slides for the teachers that include some information. You probably should maybe even put a link in to a Google Drive of your report, just so the resource has utility beyond this assessment. But we want to think of the teachers and students as co-users of this particular material. In your submission, you must include a copy of or a link to your digital learning resource. Please test the link beforehand so that you can make sure it's shared, it's accessible. If we can't access it, or you've done something silly like link it to your computer, seems unlikely with the materials we're talking about, we'll give you exactly 24 hours to send us a working link. And you'll be penalised thereafter if you fail to do so. So test beforehand. You need to provide a report of no more than 2 pages. The fonts and spacing and stuff are already described in the like they're in the template. So follow the template is basically the recommendation here. Again, like the previous assessment, there's no direct penalty for not using the template, but do so at your own risk because the template is designed to help you to hit the assessment requirements. So you can go without the support, that's your choice. I don't advise it though. The report should include an introduction that outlines the key scientific concepts, context and learning indicators for the learning activities that the resource is supporting. So, this can be a fictional scenario. Is it a small school, year 5 and 5, whatever it may be? Is it a rural community? Are you addressing a particular inquiry problem or a scenario? Make that clear to us. Tie it in. It's a bit like an abridged version, just a summary of the intended context where this would occur. Include information that would show where this would fit in part of a lesson. Again, you don't need to create a new lesson plan from scratch. But you might say, look, this is the second lesson in a sequence of 3. It's addressing the explore phase. So a bit of context, but if you're going in a new direction, you don't need to create a full lesson plan. That's excessive. So you want to make explicit connect links to really the 5 E's or a different model. Tell us if you want to go different, but the 5 E's is what we're talking about. Which phase or phases are you going for? Again, don't reorder, merge, or skip. You need to include the relevant science and technology outcomes that the resource is targeting. And if you just decide to go cross-curriculum as a focus, that could be an element of science and technology pedagogy that we've discussed too. So there are different pathways here. The students' alternative conceptions about the concepts being covered. Again, notice it's the concepts being covered. So it doesn't need to be forced into the resource. And if you are struggling to find scholarly material relating to the specific area you're looking at, you can always find alternative conceptions related to the scientific process generally to fall back on. And it doesn't need to be perfect. You might be doing late primary school and find some early high school research. We try to be generous. It doesn't need to be super recent or new. If it's scholarly, you'll get marks for it. And there's stuff in the Scamp and Preston materials. You'll also need to explain how and why the resource is being used. The how are the pedagogies. At this stage, look, they'll investigate, they'll work through, isn't going to cut it. We want to see the technical pattern language from the subject, what pedagogies you're using, and why those pedagogies are worth using, worth facilitating. Find research that suggests why your technology is beneficial. You can draw on some research that I've shared from my own research, like that scoping review provides evidence and some citations to consider. You need to provide in-text references and a reference list in the APA 7th format, as you would with everything. So you need to consider some of the major elements of science and technology pedagogy. Again, not all, because you can't. So we want to see what the thing that grabs you is. You might have a brilliant idea that links to 2 or 3 of them brilliantly. Go for it. We want depth, not breadth necessarily. So it could be alternative conceptions, the skill development, working scientifically could be a real focus, higher order thinking, authenticity, a community project, a problem scenario, whatever. I mean, we've been through it. We're curious, really excited to see what you come up with. And make sure you cite those scholarly sources because that report does need to be scholarly for the higher marks. But let's move on now to the... let's go with the rubric next, I think. I'll just bring this up on, make sure I don't have this... Yep, okay. So like the previous assessment, we do have these formative criteria, which are again unweighted, so you don't immediately lose marks. But you can probably guess if you haven't referenced any scholarly materials, you won't hit certain criteria for scholarly reference materials that are embedded elsewhere. So best to check. Make sure that the science skills are accurate. We'll judge that ourselves. You need to make sure it's aligned with the 5 E's or something similar. And I'm hoping if you stuffed this in the first assessment, you at least listen to the feedback and will not be doing that in the second assessment. And of course, literacy and referencing should be accurate. Hopefully, if you had a deficit or an issue in this space, you receive guidance on that in the first assessment feedback. So the first thing you're marked on here is the digital learning resource, which is weighted at 25 marks. We've got a series of kind of criteria here, but they're sort of merged together to give us a bit of flexibility because these things are quite unique. We want to reserve a bit of judgment in how we move across these. So we'll go through them in sequence. You can, of course, contact your lecturer if you have any questions. But the first thing you'll need to do to pass, so this first strand here is about technical proficiency, the supporting resources and learner interaction. Okay? So demonstrating technical proficiency, that means that the technology does what you say it's going to do. If I click on the link, it works. If I click on a video, it's there. If you've got an audio clip, I can hear it. So there may be some minor design issues, but they're not fatal. So the classic we see is weird clashing text. So green and red, or yellow, like those sort of yellow, blue, red, green, like bright colour clashes that can be really hard to see. That would be considered a minor issue. You can still access it, but it's irritating. There could be formatting stuff. Like links aren't linked. We'd have to copy and paste. So we can still access it, but it's really causing issues. If we can't access stuff, it's a major design issue. So if you've linked the stuff on your computer, you're in trouble. Even if you send it to us, you're still in trouble in a sense. You can overcome it, but you have major design issues, and we consider that limited technical efficiency. So does it do what you want it to do? At this level, it is sound technical proficiency, so everything works as intended. And instead of it being appropriate, suitable for the area, it is now it helps to facilitate learning. So it's not just content appropriate, it is signalling to student-centered teaching and learning approaches that we've talked about in the subject. So it might be that it instructs students to go outside and collect some pictures of living and non-living things, for example, for categorization. So it brings in maybe rich data collection. And there are no design issues. So everything's there. It doesn't need to look flashy. It doesn't need to look like it's been made in Adobe Premiere or something like that. It needs to be clear, consistent, thematically appropriate. It doesn't need to be professional. At this level, it goes beyond technical proficiency to demonstrates understandings of the affordances provided by the technology. So it could be student choice. You could be giving multimodal options for assessment tasks. There could be a digital portfolio. So you're starting to see how the technology and show how the technology enriches the student-centered practices rather than replaces them. So again, advanced technological proficiency, a bit of judgment call on our behalf. This might involve you creating like your own videos like I'm doing right now, or using H5P to create interactive elements or quizzes and things of that nature. So things are really sort of starting to fly at the distinction level. It's all possible, and we will be working on it in class, or if you're listening to it later, you will have worked on it in class. At this level, you demonstrate a highly developed interrelated understanding of the technical components and educational affordances. Now, bear in mind that this is partly shown through the resource and perhaps a teacher background section and the report. So if you are using very good quality evidence and unpacking scholarly citations, we can maybe start to get you high marks. When we say interrelated, you are starting to connect the ideas together. So you might be talking about different forms of assessment and then relating that to catering for two diverse needs in the classroom, and so on and so forth. So you're starting to link things like the 5 E's with inquiry, with authenticity, whatever. There are many ways to connect them. But if you start doing that and justify that with citations, you're probably getting into developing interrelated understandings of it. The other thing that we see at this level is that non-linear learning is explicit within the design. Do the students get 3 choices, go here, here, or here? Are they given a decision as to how they show the assessment? Do they get choices around how they design their model? Do some get to do it physically? Do some get to design it in Tinkercad? Do they design their own quizzes? Do they make choices in groups? So is there a jigsaw approach? So if non-linearity, multiple pathways through the lesson to the outcomes, is evident in the design, you will get that mark. Not easy, requires more work, but that's why it's an HD column. At the pass level for digital resource supplementary elements, because you're not just going to type into a website, right? You're going to have pictures, videos, all sorts of stuff, hopefully. The digital resource will include 2 different digital media elements sourced from the internet and which contribute to the learning in a deep way. Now, what I mean by this is you can have pictures taken from a website of different animals and the students classify them. Fine. If they're just clip art of butterflies or something that's just there for a title page, that doesn't contribute to the learning in a deep way. So they have to be asked to do something with the digital media that's provided. The elements are the types, not the number. So if you've got 20 pictures, you've got pictures. That's it. If you've got 20 pictures and 3 website links, you've got pictures and websites. That's 2. So it's the type, not the overall number. At the credit level, you have 3 digital media elements. I mean, website, picture, video. It's not hard. I mean, YouTube's out there, podcast, whatever you like to think. And at least one of these has been created by the student themselves. In this case, you. Maybe as a model for them to create, but something's been created by you that goes within the digital learning resource hub that you've created. The next one, of course, is more than 3 digital media elements. So again, the number is going up. At least 2 of which have been developed by you. So maybe you've created like a picto chart or some sort of visual summary, a visual image showing a task requirement or a design brief. You might have created a video. You might end up inserting audio cues, rubrics, different things created by you. Not sourced from elsewhere, created by you. Not required to pass, but required that supplementary work, a YouTube video, for example, to go along with your pictures. At this level, it is more than 3 digital media elements, at least 2 of which have been developed by you. So maybe there's like forms that they fill in, like little workbooks that go into Google Drive, for example. So the digital portfolios or something. Heaps of options. But again, here it stays at least 2. So if it doesn't quite fit for you to create 3, you can work around that by having some other sources ones. The next one is, of course, the learner interaction. So you can create all this stuff till you're blue in the face. If it doesn't contribute to learning, then we're not going to count it. So the resource requires learner interaction at least 2 activities. So they're doing something, they might be answering questions, they might be completing an investigation. The students are doing something more than sitting and listening. Learner interaction is considered in the design of the resource. So there are question prompts to respond to. There are things they're asked to produce in response to it. It's not a passive piece of work. It's promoting student interaction, and it provides at least 2 different cognitive opportunities beyond the basics. So think of Bloom's taxonomy in this space. That you might have, kind of recall, understand, apply, for example, occurring as the verbs. So ask yourself as you draft it, what are they doing? What's the verb here? At this level, learner interaction is a consistent part of the resource. So it's always there. They're always doing something. There are no throwaway, here's just 20 videos that I've thrown in, or here's a find a word or something. They are always required to interact with the resource, fill in forms, share stuff, go and do a completely different task, create a video, whatever it is. It could even just direct them away from the resource and come back later. Like, you can do that. So we want at least 3 different, including a higher order thinking. And when I say higher order thinking, I'm thinking those top 3 in Bloom's taxonomy. You really want to think about sort of justification and creation would be my recommendation. So they could be creating their own digital elements, for example. And then learner interaction is integral in the resource. So they are required to have input that is needed to advance things. So a good example I often see is that they need to share data in a Google Sheet that can then be graphed and used as the basis for a presentation or something. Okay, so it's a bit like the cross-curricular links in a sense. And we need at least 2 different higher order thinking cognitive opportunities. Again, 2 of the top 3. So really headed towards create would be my recommendation here. Creating and justifying. The syllabus links are pretty consistent with what you've seen before. Again, you can do and or design and production here. So you need at least 1 knowledge and understanding and 1 of design and production. Again, it's and or at the pass level, it's both at the credit level and above. Again, here there's some inaccuracy at basic links. The content's right, but the verbs are a bit low. You probably, if you're kind of here in one, you're probably here in the next one as well, to be quite honest. You've got the verbs and content and actions being reasonably accurate. So, if they're being required to analyse, you can see analysis evident in how it's framed. Okay. At this level, it's somewhat underdeveloped or tenuous, like, you're talking about investigations, but there's nothing there really queuing towards the specific elements of an investigation. At credit and above, we're seeing things like questioning, data collection, data analysis, interpreting data, presenting findings, answering questions, those sorts of things. At this level, again, integrative, you'd be familiar with it by now. They need to engage in working scientifically and/or design and production to achieve the outcomes. So they've got to create something. Could be a design task. They need to create something in Tinkercad, like a school playground. We've been through that before. And at the high distinction level, there's a big scenario that ties all this together, a big question, a challenge, problem-based learning scenario, whatever you like. Okay? At this level, the skills are fully developed and deeply connected to the main outcome. So there might be resources supporting certain skill development. There might be an assessment or formative assessment monitoring this, and a second knowledge and understanding may be incorporated to address this logically. So, you might have Earth and space being supported by material world. And I keep saying that because I keep thinking of different materials and how they deal with moisture in a tsunami, for example. Like that could be the theoretical scenario for you. So again, full integration here. And again, a secondary strand may be incorporated, and you've still got that sort of seamless connection to skill development as well. Again, a judgment call on our behalf, but notice here it says may. You do not need to include a secondary outcome if it doesn't make sense. If we still think it's hitting the high distinction qualities, we'll give it a high distinction. Then we're into the report aspect of all of this. So again, the report is 2 pages of content, including references and excluding references and appendices. You can go over the 2 pages for those. So at the past level, the report outlines how the resource will be used in the lesson. So at this stage, we're sort of, there are pedagogies, the 5 E's. We kind of get technically what you're getting at, and you might be idling and kind of sort of the justification is it's good because it's good. It's fun, it's handy. You're just using sort of throwaway justification lines. You're relying on persuasive language but not providing arguments and evidence for that. At the credit level, it's organised and it includes a description of how and why the resource will be used. So you are justifying that. This particular tool is being used because. We're using group work because. And that's where you start to provide those evidence from the subject, from your own justifications. But it's more than just it's fun because it's fun, or it works because it works. So circular logic isn't there. Again, it articulates how and why. Again, it's well organised and fluent, so the sections might flow together. You might merge the how and the why and reorganise the report in some sense. And at this level, you provide a reasoned justification. So that's where we start to see really deep unpack of scholarly evidence. You might say, according to researcher A and B, brackets 2019, use of cooperative learning strategies has shown to do X, Y, and Z. So you start providing those deep reasoning points beyond just, here's Scamp and Preston. Here's a reference to James's lecture PowerPoint. You go into this academic evidence. At this level, you provide description of at least 2 major science and technology elements that are relevant. So this is holistically analysed. So if you talk about student-centred learning, and your report is video, find a word, we won't count it. It has to be represented in the design. So the bare minimum would be 5 E's in the syllabus. If you square those away, you're probably getting at least 2. Maybe you've got a deep assessment. There's a rubric and a whole bunch of other cool things going on there. And, we can see, kind of perhaps a connection to other KLAs in that. We're at least 3. Maybe group work's a big part of this. Perhaps 4. Maybe you've got a big problem-based scenario on top of this that ties it all together. Suddenly we're at 4 or more. But they have to be, supported by the report and evident in the resource. And there's a bit of judgment to this. Then we've got a criteria strand here that talks about your use of academic literature. So they do overlap, but we do like to sort of tease out evidence here. Links are made between theory and the content and design of the digital learning resource. So, probably talking about constructivism at some level. The points made may be general and are not fully represented. So, maybe you're sort of saying, look, there's group work and there's a slide that says group work now, but it doesn't really use the resource to support that. It's implicit. We've got to do the work to make it work for you, even if the idea is reasonable. Okay, it's the same sort of idea as the first assessment. The next one, we've got some direct links are made between theory and the design of the resource. Okay, we've got a bit of Scamp here, a bit of Preston here, a bit of problem-based learning here. The citations are there, but they're generally just in brackets, just at the end. At this level, we have appropriate explicit links. And what this means is that you take the content of the reference out and put it in the citation. So normally what this means is we see the name of the academic author in the sentence. So you might say, according to an investigation of 3 classrooms, Smith found that cooperative learning improved X, Y, and Z in a sample of students. So you actually unpack the evidence. That's what we mean by explicit. You go in and you read the abstract, you see what it means, and you say, what is this evidence? Let's describe it. You don't just bolt it on. Bolt-on references are here and here. You can pass and get a credit with those, but if you unpack the evidence, show a bit of scholarly rigour, a bit of heft, you'll get higher marks. And at this level, it's synthesised and explicit. So what this means is you've got multiple sources and they're linked together. So we often see things like, according to Dean and others in a review of scholarly sources, blah, blah, blah. Similarly, later researchers found these digital technologies can supplement this. So you sort of have multiple sources being combined together through your writing to make a bigger argument. Okay? So they're synthesised. So some explicit unpack, synthesised. They're brought together. So you've got those connective words like similarly, however, thus, therefore, further to this point, those little phrases do the work there. And then finally, we've got sort of the strand here around alternative conceptions. So at the past level, you list examples of pupils' alternative conceptions that are related to the content, and you may use one of the textbook recommended reading textbooks. Scamp and Preston have them. Fine. Go and get a bunch for Living World, and off you go. Rock and roll. At the next level, you list and describe them. So you don't just say, they don't understand that lightning isn't alive. You say, they misattribute life to lightning because of movement and the appearance of reproduction. Okay, so you start to go into more detail in the description of it, and you provide multiple scholarly reference, i.e. peer-reviewed journal articles. We've covered this in previous lectures, not just the textbook, and you've all got access to this. At this level, you list, describe, and discuss. So you might talk about where they apply, what aspects of an alternative conception you're addressing. So you start, framing it in your own language, and you provide multiple references again. So it's similar here, but then you make suggestions for how these could be identified. This is 3 marks. What diagnostic assessment would you use to identify these? And they could be about the content, they could be about the scientific process or technology broadly. There are lots of options here. Everyone's got a path to success, even if you're in a really niche area. At this level, you list, describe, and critically discuss examples. So you might sort of say, certain things need to be prioritised. Students' interrogation of information is really important because of the rise of misinformation or something like that. You provide a critical lens on this. You provide multiple citations, and again, you make suggestions for how they can be identified. Great, just like the previous one. But then you suggest how they could be dismantled. Station rotation, conceptual change. Is there a debate? Are there key websites you point them to? They don't need to be in the resource unless it makes sense, but you can describe these briefly in the report to give us a sense of how A, you would assess, and B, you would think about dismantling them with student-centered strategies. And maybe you bring in some evidence for that as well to really strengthen up these other elements of the report as well, because they kind of cross-pollinate a bit. So hopefully you found that useful. I think there are really clear marks, like really straightforward things that you can do to get high marks. We've talked about how to unpack the literature, and use that to justify your choices. But let's look at the template briefly. Look, it's recommended. So I've seen some people, we used to have how and why separate. We've now merged them. So you might even talk about, page 1, page 2, page 3. And this is where you bring in scholarly literature. Page 1 does this cooperative learning strategy. Here's the evidence as to why these things work, etc., etc. The introduction should include sort of, that big context. What's the concept, context, and learning indicators? And how would you position your unit of work? Is it sort of a theoretical lesson 2 where you're doing explore? What have they done previously? It's all hypothetical, but just position it. Syllabus links are pretty reasonable. You can explain them, but listing them and maybe appending the content points is fine too. You can describe the resource. So what is it? It's a Google site and it features X, Y, and Z. Now, I've seen a reasonable argument, and the reason I don't merge them in the template is because this can confuse some people and cause them to miss the finer points. So it's a bit of a fine line for me. But if you're listening to this lecture, you might be someone who merges these, because there is reason to think describing what it is, how it would be used, and why makes sense. So you might say, page 1, it is this, I'll be using it this way because. But I always keep these separate, because if I merge them, people will miss the finer points, and they will simply describe and they won't tell me how or why. Because if you're just saying, it's a video and it's, this and there's QR codes, but you don't say, well, and that's part of a jigsaw approach and here's the evidence. I've given a lot of the evidence throughout the weeks too, so you should have that. So what is it, how is it going to be used, and why should I use this? And the better the why, the higher the mark. So because I said so is not going to do much. Because the literature says so, here's the reference. Because the literature says so, and this is the evidence contained within, here's my writing, that gets you high marks. And the alternative conceptions are here as well. You can provide examples and provide strategies for how they can be identified and dismantled. So how much detail you go into is up to you. You get 2 pages for that, and you can pop some references in. You can include appendices if you want as well, it's up to you. But I think I think it's all pretty clear at this point. This is one of my favourite assessment tasks to mark in my entire career. Love marking these. They're a lot of fun. They have a scholarly element that's contained. People show some really good academic skills in these final reports. I mean, I often find that really heartening alongside the digital stuff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what people produce for these. If you have any questions about this, please let me know, and I can answer them, or your subject coordinator can. But hopefully you found this lecture useful. There's another lecture that you can engage with on science quick hitters, stuff you can use as a casual teacher, little simple lessons to get your foot in the door stuff if you're interested. But on that note, good luck in the preparation for your assessment task. And the EMS207 lecturers, markers, and myself are looking forward to seeing what you produce.